Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast series for sustainable procurement. I'm Shaun McCarthy, Director of Action Sustainability Community Interest Company. Today's podcast feels a bit weird because I'm actually interviewing a guy that I've worked with for the last 30 years or thereabouts. So welcome Ian Heptonstall, co-director with me of Action Sustainability Trading Limited.
Thanks, Shaun. 30 years. Wow, that's quite a long time.
I know, it's longer than most people who've been married.
I think I deserve some type of medal, Shaun.
Well, I think you do, actually. Yeah, absolutely.
No, seriously, it's been a great journey, and life has changed a lot in those 30 years. If you look why we first got together, and what we're now doing, it's quite amazing, really.
Yeah, we were young and idealistic then. We had a broad mind and a narrow waist. Things have certainly changed since then for me. Okay, so Ian, tell us a bit about your background. Obviously, I know a lot of this story, but our audience don't. So Ian, tell us a bit about your background and how you became involved in sustainability.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. 30 years ago, I was running my own business in supply chains, and I had a conference business, and we were helping large businesses to better understand their supply chains and the multiple tiers of their supply chains. And in particular, helping large businesses to engage with those supply chains. And nowadays, we call that supply diversity. And very interestingly, back in the day, back in the early 1990s, when I started that business, we were talking about community benefits, we were talking about engaging with the local community, etc. And we didn't see it as the social side of sustainability. But obviously, Shaun, came across you when you were working with Heathrow Airport, and we were looking at the multiple tiers of the supply chain to an airport. How do small businesses and minority-owned businesses, because there are a lot of those around Heathrow Airport, get involved in the process of actually bidding for and winning work on the airport? And we did a lot of work understanding about how tier ones and tier twos can engage properly with their SME supply chains, that's their small and medium-sized supply chains. And with great success in terms of we actually found that when you reached out to those local businesses and those small businesses and those minority-owned businesses, and you spoke in their language and you basically engaged them properly and took the time to engage them, they were very successful at winning business with major businesses. And if they're successful at winning that business, that means that the bigger businesses are getting a better supplier as a result. Now, over time, that kind of morphed into people wanting to do more and more for their supply chain. And eventually, Shaun, you and I were talking about, what should we do to kind of commercialize this? What should we do to look at spreading the word better? I was quite keen on how do we commercialize it. You were keen on how do you look at the kind of non-for-profit, the sharing of knowledge. And that's when we launched Action Sustainability Community Interest Company, which is great. And then when I sold my supply chain conference business in 2009, 2010, I was really keen to look at, how do we actually look at this opportunity? How do we look at the opportunity of commercializing the opportunity to engage large businesses and to help those large businesses to engage their small and medium-sized organizations to drive change? By that time, we were talking about environmental and social sustainability, because it's the same techniques you use. You're just looking at different impacts and how do we drive those different impacts. Yeah, so that's how we got involved in it, and it's been a long journey and moving from that kind of social side of sustainability. Shaun, your expertise around environmental sustainability and supply chains has brought that together. So I suppose, Shaun, you were bringing that environmental and big business outlook. I was bringing the kind of the small business, small supplier outlook and that social side to it. Since we formed the trading business in 2010, it's been a real blast. It's been really, really great fun.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. For the benefit of our younger audience, tell us what it was like, because when we first started doing this, particularly the Meet the Buyers at Heathrow, etc., there was no internet, there was no email, there was no technology to help us. How did you guys manage to achieve that level of engagement that you talk about?
At this moment, I can say, well, when I first started in business in 1986, there was one computer in the whole of the business employing 100 people, and that was in the finance department. However, when I started my own business up, yeah, you're right, there was no internet. The great thing about small businesses, you can adopt innovation probably quicker than big businesses can. You can spot the opportunity. And I know that when we were working with large construction companies in 2009, 2010, who were struggling with the concept of how do we build greener, more sustainable buildings? And the answer to that is you need a supply chain who understands sustainability and have the competence and capability to build those greener infrastructure, the greener buildings that clients were beginning to demand. And I say beginning to demand because we very much in 2010 were one of the early adopters. But it became really clear very quickly that for a large construction company to educate its very diverse and fragmented supply chain would cost a lot of money. In fact, too much investment for one large company to do on its own. And interestingly, we had three companies at the time who had the same problem. So we said, well, we need to have a school, we need to educate them, but we can't afford to do that in person. So we're going to have to do that online. We need to use e-learning. We need to use the internet to do that. And I think the reaction back in 2009, 2010 was, well, that'll never work. You'll never get people to collaborate. You'll never get businesses in the construction sector to learn online. That just won't happen. Clearly, we've proved them wrong. We came up with the idea of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is an online school to build the capability of the construction industry here in the UK. And yeah, we found out that those things that people said would never happen will happen if you facilitate that conversation and you get people in a room who are willing to collaborate. And I have to say, it's not really the businesses, it's the individual leaders in those organizations who are willing to drive change that makes a difference. So we were lucky that we had three leading people in three major contractors who were willing to drive change, who were willing to take a risk. Because if you want to drive change and you want to make a difference, you've got to be willing to understand what those risks are and what those opportunities are. And I know within ISO 2400, there is that piece about risk and opportunity assessment. And you have to have people who are willing to see the opportunity, but also willing to take the risk there. And we were able to do that and bring together originally 3 organizations, which then morphed onto 7 organizations. But we were able to bring together through that power of leadership, 3 companies, 3 senior directors standing up and said, we want to lead change. And by 3 senior clients being able to do that, we were able to facilitate an outreach to other organizations who are willing to come on that journey with them and bring together enough companies where we had a critical mass. So that meant that when we're reaching out to their supply chains, if you're a supplier being told to do one thing by your customer, you might do it. But if there are 5 customers telling you to do the same thing, you really thinking I should do that. If there are 10 customers telling you you should do that all in one way, you're thinking I definitely should be doing that. And if you then say, look, if you're doing the same thing for each of those customers, so therefore you only need to do it once rather than 10 times, that's going to save me time, it's going to drive efficiency in my business, I'm definitely going to do that. So we've managed with the online supply chain school to really drive change across the UK construction sector. And it's great now to see that being adopted in different international markets as well.
Thanks, Ian. When you talk about risk, it all sounds a bit mad looking back on it. So we started a business in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis and set out to do something that everybody said was impossible.
Yeah, just sound a bit dodgy, that, doesn't it? Yeah. But I think that's what you come into, like the need for large businesses to work with small businesses. You know, if you really want to drive innovation, you've got to think about how, you know, the ability of big businesses to change. And it's interesting when you look at even the really big tech companies, you know, you see the really big tech companies, the innovation really comes from small businesses who then the big tech companies go and gobble up those small businesses at some stage, don't they? Because the innovation is driven by small businesses who see that opportunity. And to be frank, I'm more willing to take a risk. And because they're more agile, I'm willing to take that risk. And when I look at the world of sustainability and I look at the world about how our big business is going to deliver on their sustainability promises, that's where we need to engage small businesses. because it's those small businesses who are going to deliver in those supply chains for those big organizations. And certainly big construction clients and infrastructure clients can't do it without their major contractors. Those major contractors are in effect project managers who manage that complex supply chain which sits beneath them. And that complex supply chain is dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises who are willing to take that risk, who are willing to innovate and spot an opportunity. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to risk, obviously it is about decision making, and you and I have always said it only takes one person in a very large organisation to say no, and the whole thing falls apart. It just takes one influential, risk-averse person. Whereas when we started, it was just the two of us, and we agreed, let's get on with it. There was nobody there to say no.
Yeah, I think you're right, and there you have it. So you only need one person from the business prevention police to get involved, and in any large organisation, there's always a big department of business prevention police, because people don't want to take a risk. You're rarely rewarded in large organisations from taking risk. It's about managing risk all the time, and I have to say, in lots of organisations, I think the management of risk is an illusion. Because you think you're managing it by, as a procurement person, by writing lots of lovely contracts and lots of lovely contractual terms. But if that supplier goes bust, guess what? The risk comes right back to you. And, if that supplier is having financial difficulties, that risk comes right back to you. As we've seen with the pandemic, these large and extended supply chains, the risk comes back to the major contractor or the client at the end of the day. So I think having a better appetite and understanding of risk is really important if we are going to drive change.
Brilliant. So, Ian, another thing that we talked about in terms of new developments and part of the picture, before we move on to the internationalisation of the school, performance management. We've always seen the whole kind of strategic approach around sustainable supply chain management involves needing to measure and manage the performance of your supply chain organisations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, everybody says what gets measured gets done, and they're absolutely right about that. And so if you look at the enablers around the ISO standard, we look at risk, we look at education, we look at engaging your supply chain. But one of the key enablers is measurement. And, at the end of the day, that probably comes through the contract management stage. And I do sometimes wonder how organisations have a procurement stage and a contract management departments who are not linked together at all. And, if you're setting your suppliers to agree to carbon reduction, waste reduction, or biodiversity enhancement, or improvements in community benefits and the like, if you agree on that contract stage, surely you need a contract management system which will enable you to know whether the organisation is actually delivering on those promises. So whilst the school is all about educating and what organisations know, we need to have something which understands what companies actually do as well. The mad idea we had was actually, surely there must be a system which enables people to manage the sustainability data from their supply chains so that we know whether the companies are actually reducing their waste, reducing their carbon, etc. So we set up an exercise, probably in about 2013, to try to understand what actually existed in the marketplace then. And to be frank, there was virtually nothing in the marketplace which enabled large organisations to understand the sustainability performance of their supply chain. So with a little bit of reluctance, we found ourselves in the business of developing an online tool, which snappily named the Sustainability Tool, which is a tool to measure supply chain performance. And that enables procurement managers or project managers to understand if companies are delivering on their promises. I have to say, we still see the uptake of that tool is slower than we think it should be. For us, it seems a no-brainer that you must have to understand what's going on in your supply chain. And it's seriously, if you want to do it effectively, you don't want to have data coming into you once a year that we see from a lot of our clients, but you need that data coming in on a monthly basis. You wouldn't wait for a year to find out whether all the products that you've asked for to be delivered over the previous year have been delivered. You'd be expecting weekly reports or monthly reports at the very least about the quality of the deliveries, the rejection rates, and how often they're delivered on time. So why aren't we getting that from the sustainability data? So our sustainability tool looks at that and enables those large procurers to actually measure what's going on in their multi-tiers of their supply chain by getting real data from their supply chain. And we even now see that, procurers are still relying a lot on proxy data. Spend data that they're using, which they're using that spend data for a particular category of supply and multiplying it by a proxy to give them their carbon footprint. To be frank, it's useless. It's useless information, but because it's easy to do, we, in the role we, rely on that data because it's easy to get. The people are happy to sell you that data. But, if you change your supplier, that data doesn't change. So we need to get real data from our suppliers, and we need to get our suppliers into the habit of collecting data. But my experience is we've still got a very large number of SMEs who are not even measuring their energy. They don't even know where to get their carbon data from, let alone their waste data, let alone their social value data. So there's a big education process to go through to get the suppliers actually capturing that information and then reporting that information up using a series of standard metrics into their supply chain. Because at the end of the day, the metrics around carbon have been set, but interestingly, the metrics around other sustainability issues don't have that clarity. In the world of carbon reporting, it's set. We know what the greenhouse gas emissions are. We know how we're going to report those. We have in the UK, we have what the DEFRA coefficients are every year, and they're released every year. There's a standard to reporting, which is important, but we don't see that on the social side. We don't see that. We don't see that at all on other forms of waste or biodiversity, etc. So, having that clarity of what data should be reporting is important for me. My personal opinion is that government should actually set some clear reporting metrics for industry to follow, and then they should step away and leave business to get on with it. But if we leave business to set what those metrics are, we get what we've seen, which is a whole range of different organisations coming up with different metrics, different coefficients, and different values to different performance. And it's a little bit like the Wild West out there. I think it'd be better off if we had some standardization of data which needs to be collected around sustainability, making it a lot easier for the supply chain. And if the supply chain are collecting standardized data and only having to report it into one place, and that makes it a lot easier then for procurers as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. So in summary, we started a business in a global financial crisis. We took on and tried to do something that the entire sector said we couldn't do. And then, knowing nothing whatsoever about software development, we developed a piece of software. I'm not sure, really.
But it's worked out really well,
Yeah,
it started out with an organisation with just the two of us. Now we've got an organisation with 70, 75 employees, we're international reputation, and we're doing some great things. And we always said as a business as well, Shaun, that our success wouldn't be measured financially, but we'd be measured by the impact that we have. And our impact is about our clients winning awards. It's about for their sustainability, for reducing their sustainability impacts. And so many of our clients are now winning awards for the great work that they're doing. But we're also actually seeing, I think last year, just over 50% of the 8,000 companies that we educated around sustainability in the supply chain school last year. That's 8,000 companies we reached. Over 45,000 people were learning through the school. 50% of those organisations said they actually reduced their carbon last year, and just under 60% of them said attributed the school to helping them to actually do that. That's real impact, and that's impact at scale as well. And that's why you and I get out of bed every morning.
So, Ian, tell us about, the school concept. Obviously, we've always had a belief that this is replicable potentially in other sectors and in other countries. And we've had some success in there, but clearly there's more to go for. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from where do our impacts lie? So we've been working very much in the UK, but we've been working with a lot of international companies. So we work, just for those unfamiliar with the school model, all the learning in the school for the supply chain is free at the point of use, but it's made free at the point of use because we have partners to the school, and those partners are large companies and their clients who fund the school through an annual partnership fee. And that then enables us to deliver all the training to their supply chain completely free at the point of use. We don't need to put a barrier or a tax on the supply chain to access sustainability knowledge and sustainability learning. And we found by removing that barrier, that's really driven the numbers of people learning for the school. And remember, there's never been any shortage of knowledge in this area. What there's been is a shortage of connecting that knowledge with the people who need to learn. So that's what the school does. However, those partner organisations, although we've engaged them in the UK, they have, number one, they're very international organisations. Many of our partners operate in international markets. That's, in other words, they build infrastructure and buildings and homes in international markets. But secondly, they have a very international supply chains as well. So when you look at that, we found that our partners have been asking us to enter new markets. So we've got a school that we licensed in Australia, which is great, and that's been going for now about 6 years. We launched early this year a school in the Irish market, which is very interesting route into the European market for us, for those international people on the call. And we had a little thing called Brexit a number of years ago, which means that the UK is no longer in Europe. So we're not governed by EU legislation such as CSRD, but going to the Irish market has been quite enlightening for us in terms of some of the reporting requirements and drivers in that European market. But also we're discussing this with a number of our partners, and I think about 20%, 25% of our partners had significant business interest in the United States. And they were saying, look, we're using your content in the United States to educate. I think one of our partners educated 1,000 of their procurement managers on sustainable procurement and sustainability issues. And I was discussing this with this particular partner and saying, well, it's good, our content, but it's not contextualized for the US market. And he said, Ian, it's 90% there. We just got to get the next, so we got to get that next 10%. But whilst you've only got 90% of the right content, it's the best that we've got. So we're going to use that in the meantime. But it'd be great if we could have content localized to the American market. And so from those discussions could become the plan that we're now looking to launch a version of the school platform in January next year. And delighted to say that we've committed to do that. We've gotten a number of partners already on board, which is great, and a lot of interest from a number of other partners. I think in total we're speaking to about 20 or 30 of our partners about joining that school in America when we launch in January next year. So yeah, it's been really interesting seeing the US market, and you could say that the US market is in effect 50 different markets, but we could have done that in the UK as well. And remember, the school is not about legal compliance. The school is about telling suppliers what's going to be happening in 12 months' time, 24 months' time, 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, and giving them visibility of where their customers are going to be in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. And if I'm a small business and I've got visibility of where my customers are going to go, I can make better decisions. I can start being agile. I can be I'm more likely to take those risks about adapting and adopting sustainable practices because I can see the opportunity with my customers. If 20 of my customers are telling me that in the States these things are happening, I'll change my business practices to align with what they need to do in the States. And there might be a difference between what's required today in California and in New York and in Illinois and in Texas. But over time, whether that might be 12 months, 24 months, or 5 years or 10 years, are we going to need to be more sustainable than we are now if we're based in Illinois or Texas? Yes, we are. The extent that we might move on that path might well be different. We might be moving at different speeds. But we found in the UK that we've got 8,000 companies that we're working with. They're all working at different speeds. So we need to be able to show what great looks like. And one of the great things we've done for the school is we've developed a sustainability roadmap through our sustainability maturity assessment, which looks at 17 different topics and enables suppliers to see where they currently are, for them to understand in their business what knowledge individual people have, so what do they know, but then from a company level, what does the company do on its maturity assessment, and get benchmarks against others within their trade categories about are they performing better than the average in their trade category, and what do they need to do to move up and to move to the right hand side of that maturity assessment and to improve their practice. And they can decide at what speed they want to go depending on the cohort of their customers. They might be working with customers who are on the leading edge of sustainability who are wanting to drive change. They might be working with customers who are going slower at it, so therefore will be going slower. But understanding the speed that their customers are going at is important. The speed that legislation is changing, the speed that building codes and building regulations are changing, enables these small businesses to make those decisions based upon knowledge and based upon a proper assessment of risk and opportunities.
Just to add to the story then, we started a business in a global financial crisis. We tried to do something the construction sector said was impossible. We developed some software when we didn't know anything about software, and now we're going to America and starting a school, and off we go.
That's right. Yeah, where
talking about the challenges, how do you see the cultural differences between the UK and the US and some of the challenges that we might expect to meet?
Yeah, culture is an interesting thing, and I think we're in danger of categorizing a country as one country and everybody in that country behaving the same. And you could do exactly the same in the UK market. We know in the UK market that we have a complete spectrum of views on climate change, for example. There are still climate change deniers in the UK, many of them. There are people who are absolute leaders in climate change in the UK market, and there are people on that journey. And I think it'd be wrong of us to categorise the whole UK as leaders in climate change and sustainability. And I think it'd be the same if we went to America as well. There are in the US market, there are some fabulous examples of leading edge sustainability companies who are really making a difference, and some companies who are investing huge amounts in the future markets. Look at Tesla alone in terms of changing the car industry globally. They've probably done more than most organizations to really disrupt the car industry, which is incredible. And you see that in multiple industries. You see that in the building sector in America as well. You see that in other sectors within America. So I think for us to start categorizing and saying, well, people in Texas have a different view. Well, even in Texas, you've got Austin, and then you've got other views in Texas, So I think it's wrong of us to say there is one culture. There's many cultures. I know the companies that we've been working online, we've got a lot of people who passionately get the need to drive change around sustainability and are pushing the change and leading the change in America, just as we have been doing in the UK. Where are we at with it? I would say that probably in the American market as a whole, they're a number of years behind where we're at in the UK. But that's when we went to the Irish market. One of the things the Irish market said to us, the contractors and the clients said, we think we're 10 years behind the UK market. I think with a number of the companies we're talking to in the US market, they're where we're at. They're along with the leaders at the moment that we have in the UK market. But equally, there's a whole range of followers who are not yet there and who might be 5 years behind where we are in the UK market. But there's lots of need. And especially when you get down into the supply chain, if we're talking 80% of UK businesses, SMEs, aren't measuring their carbon footprint, I'm pretty sure it'll be exactly the same in America. And whether it's 80 or 90%, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of change to drive there. There's a lot of education. So I don't want to get too hung up on the difference in culture in the American market or the Irish market or the French market, wherever it might be. There's a lot of change that we need to drive in any of those markets. And it's looking to the future. It's not really looking where we're at now. We've never been in the business of accrediting where we are now. There are people in that business who do accreditations. There are people in that business who do risk assessments and about where businesses are right now. But that's not going to change the performance of those companies. What's going to change the performance of the companies is educating them and development. What the school's about, what the sustainability tool is about supply development. How do we develop the supply chain to deliver the sustainability requirements of society and the clients? So it's an online supply development program. Is the best way to look at it. And suppliers will develop at different speeds. Anybody who believes that we can just change suppliers overnight haven't been in this business long enough. Suppliers will change at different speeds over time. And let's face it, you're not going to drop a supplier tomorrow, a valued supplier that you've been working with for 5, 10, years or whatever it might be, just because they haven't managed to reduce their carbon this year. But you're not going to want to work with them to try to understand how they can reduce their carbon next year or in 5 years' time, and how they're going, over the next 10 years to work towards net zero or whatever. You want to work with them. You don't want to, as a professional supply chain person, professional procurement person, you don't want to be swapping your suppliers from one to the other just because they're not performing on one particular metric. If they're doing everything else well, let's work with them and let's develop them to enable them to deliver your sustainability requirements.
So, United States in January 2025, where next?
That's great. I've been led by our partners. We've always taken the view that we will be led by our partners, because number one, it reduces our risk back down to the risk. So whilst we might seem completely bonkers, myself and Shaun, we mitigate that level of risk appetite that we have by saying, well, actually, are our customers interested in it? And we will engage with our customers and find out which markets they're interested in. So markets which interest me, the French market, the Spanish market, the German market interests me, because those European markets are large construction markets, which I think are really interesting, and we share a number of partners that we have. But I'm also interested in emerging markets, having a number of conversations about the Indian market, for example, which is really interesting when you look at some of these emerging markets. In the UK, we often quote a fact about that 80% of the buildings that we will have in 2050 have already been built. So our big challenge is not really about building new buildings, although it is a big challenge about building new buildings. It's also looking at the 27 million buildings, homes that we've got, and something like, I think it's 4 or 5 million commercial buildings that we've got, which need to be retrofitted to the relevant standards. But in the Indian market, guess what? 80% of their buildings that they'll have in 2050 have not yet been built. There's a massive opportunity actually in emerging markets to get it right first time. A little bit like we see in the African markets, where we didn't roll out a wired telecom system. We went straight to a mobile system instead. I think we've got the opportunity in emerging markets to go immediately to the sustainable construction end of the market, rather than going through building buildings which are inherently unsustainable, then finding out in 5 years' time or 10 years or 20 years' time, we're going to have to retrofit them at great cost. So I think there's great opportunity for us in those emerging markets as well.
Thanks, Ian. I guess that's the end of my questions. Your story has inspired me, and I already knew it. So I'm sure it will inspire our audience as well. And thanks, Ian, very much for your time and your perspective.
Thanks, Shaun. It's been a pleasure catching up with you. Here's to the next 30 years.
Here's the next 30 years. Bloody hell.
So it won't be a podcast in 30 years' time.
No, it won't be. It'll be something completely bizarre. Yeah, be a hologram or something. Yeah,
you'll be listening to avatars of us, which have been captured for posterity.
Oh, God. Can't wait.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.